Yep.
Okay.
Just now.
All right. Just give me a moment to get my screens in order, guys, and we can begin. Cecile, did you want to make a quick intro, or should I just take off?
Just take off, Ronil. Thank you all for joining, though. And Ronil will go through the presentation. And if you got any questions during the session, please use the chat window if you want, and I'll call them out when they're relevant to the presentation or what Ronil is presenting at the time. Otherwise, I will raise them in the Q&A session.
Okay, thanks, Cecile. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time to join the Sensei second webinar. This is a series of webinars that we at Sensei are running to share with you a bit more about what we've learned as in terms of lessons, tips and tricks of how you could manage a functionality or a capability within your PPM technology. Some of the challenges and best practices also within the space of schedule and task management. For the purposes of this webinar, we are focusing on schedule and task management. I'll also touch briefly on the aspects of timesheeting as they relate to tasks being assigned to people. We'll also put some leads into how tasks and resources work together. Straight out of the enterprise resource pool. However, we'll not dive too deep into enterprise resource management. The webinar that follows this, which is the third one in the queue, which is going to be run by Greg Carroll, that'll actually dive into the entire stack of enterprise resource management and portfolio constraints, etc. So tune into that one if you're interested to find out further on that. Okay, I'll kick off. A brief agenda, quick introductions, after which we'll dive into common challenges that we've seen some of our clients face across a whole range of industries. We'll then step into a walkthrough session where we'll actually go through and show you and demonstrate some of the functionalities and key artifacts within the whole space of schedule, tasks, timesheets, and resource management. We'll step out of that walkthrough into some best practices within this space and finish off with the Q&As right at the end. Do feel free, as Cecile suggested, to drop in questions. If we can't field anything on the fly, then we'll certainly take a note and get back to you. Okay, a little bit about myself. I'm the delivery manager for New South Wales at Sensei, and I come from a range of, have a range of experiences in both the private and public sector with telcos, the IT sector. Have a whole host of PPM implementations and migrations that I've done over the last decade. And one of the key areas I like to focus on are capability uplifts and roadmaps. Diving straight into it, key question we need to ask is, why do we implement projects? They essentially come in from the intent of having a strategic objective. There's a goal that we're trying to drive towards. That leads us to have portfolios, and which lead us to have programs and projects, which finally result in a whole range of tasks that we then assign to a range of resources that we have available to us. And how does all of this stitch together? All the way from an individual task to a strategic goal. Having an understanding of how this happens is quite important for us to understand why data and consistency and routine are so important in the space of task and schedule and timeline management. Because all of this data flows upwards and onwards, and it actually enables each layer of the organization, not just a strategic layer, but also a project to make timely decisions. If you're more aware of how you're managing the project and how it's morphing and changing relative to changing circumstances that you have, then the data you have at your fingertips in your reports within your schedule is more streamlined and more tuned to you being able to make good, sound decisions. Leading on to that, how does that relate to some of the current challenges we've seen with our clients? Given that we've got a whole stack of and a whole series of work going on within various departments, they're all trying to bridge a gap to strategic goals. A common gap that we find that exists is within the whole PMO space. This is not to say that PMOs are ineffective. It is to say that PMOs as an entity have one of the most challenging roles in an organization, because a gap in that particular layer of being able to impart consistency, monitor consistency in data and managing projects, it leads to a lack of consistent and trustworthy data that results in departments struggling with the administration of a project, not just in governance, but timeline, your risks, etc. It spans all the realms of your project management, artifacts. There's also at times a different level of maturity within the ranks, and it stems from in certain instances we go from being an organization that is driving initiatives just because they need to driving initiatives now in the shape and form of a project, so become accidental project managers. And we also have a whole new range of millennial and new next gen people joining the workforce, and they all have a series of opinions on how they can better drive things. This all results in a range of methodologies. You'll have very senior people in the ranks, and you'll have new people joining the team. And it shows, it's become quite evident as we've moved from the space of project survey in the good old days to project for the web and project online and various other Sensei solutions that you'd be aware of. And this results in users having the perception of this tool is too complex for me. And why am I actually putting in the work in managing a schedule, managing a timeline, and actually talking to people when I cannot actually see the value that that comes out of this for me? So really piping the value back and being able to relay to users why they need to do certain things when it comes to project management, project schedule management, and etc. And more effective task management, it's very important. The crux of it is that users want to be able to, across the spectrum of roles, work the way that they want to. And what we need to then be able to do is give them the right tool for the right sort of work that they're doing. And therefore is the initiative from Microsoft and Sensei, we're essentially trying to give our clients or users in the community and enable teams to work the way they want to, and for enterprises at all layers to get the results that they need, effectively have good and sound data-driven decision-making capacity. It's a common vision that I reckon not just Sensei and Microsoft are sharing, but all of us on the call share. Okay. To another perspective, it's not so much of a pyramid as it is a coax cable. For those from the telco side of things, at any given point in time, the data that each one of us in the organization is maintaining, it all has a relevance and it all plugs into the bigger picture. No matter how you slice it, it is all very important, and it actually enables each layer of the organization to be more efficient. I'll jump. That's what I had to say about some of the common challenges. I'll jump into a little spiel on what we'll do in what we'll call the walkthrough. I'll take you through some of the different types of projects and the ways you can create different types of projects. And I'll use project for the line and empower instance of a Sensei's product to do the show and tell. There's various ways in which you can have calendars that apply to resources and projects. How you can effectively use different flavors of project plan templates, so that when you cookie cut a project, you have something from day one to give you the best possible start and a decent enough structure. We'll do a bit of a how-to and comparison between how you could manage a schedule and a series of tasks in Microsoft Project, and also do the same in Planner. We'll cover a couple of key administrative activities. We'll talk a bit about timelines and deliverables, and a little bit about dependencies. Nothing too deep, just the tip of the iceberg. And then we'll also take a look at some of the task assignments, updates, and timesheeting type features within the technology. If you have anything other than this that you'd like to cover, please feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll endeavor to cover it too. Just pop out of this and go onto a tenant. So this is a typical project center view that you'll get, where you'll get a whole host of your projects. A key thing to make note here is that you can actually add things to your timeline. Actually do that. Try to bear with me here, just to refresh this. Okay. So what you can do with your project center is get an idea of where your projects sit. You can also, in the typical project center, functionality, have a range of views that allow you to see at an overarching level how your projects are doing relative to different KPIs. I'll just track through one of these before I click into schedule, because I know we're not here to look at project center, etc. A key thing to note here is that similar to how you have KPIs at a project schedule level on how your tasks are doing, and they all roll up to give you a KPI at your parent, at your project layer, you are able to show all of those KPIs in here as, I'm trying to look for one that's actually got a KPI in here. Schedule performance. There you go. So that there, the schedule KPI and walk KPIs, and an actual roll up of how your schedule and walk components are doing under the hood in your particular ADHA project or BEN 365 project. If I actually go a bit deeper into any one of these projects, and I'll just flip on view and go into one of those, something I'd set up earlier, what you'll see is that there is actually a range of KPIs. And I'll bring up the right view for you. As you can see that the views that you have within Project Center, some of that content is also going to pipe through into your project schedule layer of things. I'll come up with a task tracking. While that comes up, the way the schedule operates here is very similar to how it'll operate within your project professional application. There's two ways in which you can handle a schedule or manage a schedule. You can use a browser-based interface that you see here in front of you, and you can actually click and edit and actually edit that, start editing that in browser, or you could actually click in Microsoft Project and go into and launch launch the particular schedule as a using the normal approach, and we'll go into the application in a while. What I'll do is I'll cover off some of the timeline and some of the more other functions in here. You can also click on edit and go into browser, and I'll actually add a few more milestones here into the timeline. Highlighted that particular task, or you could say these two tasks, and if I actually wanted to, because they actually fell in the span of the next 2 weeks, be able to tag them to the timeline, I've actually tagged those up here. And what's going to happen is this enables you to week on week use a timeline view to be able to go in and flag all those things and keep a close eye on those things that are they're quite important to you for this particular period of reporting, and so on and forth. As you can see here, I've tagged all the phases, the relevant phases for this particular project, and a couple of key milestones, but I could actually go the whole 9 yards and tag a whole host of things in there. Also, I can go in and remove things using just this browser window if I don't necessarily want to tag that within the timeline, and actually then start tagging something that's more along the lines of the quality assurance area, which falls right up there on the right-hand side, and so on and forth. You can do this either within the browser window or within your Project Professional window. And at the same time, within this space here, you can also do a couple of conduct a couple of key functions, which is setting baselines, clearing baselines, and actually doing anything from adding a particular task to deleting and moving things around. This does give you decent enough functionality to have a team member access this HUD and run some basic project management, undertaking. Or else, the reason you'd go to a Project Professional app is if you actually wanted to dive a bit deeper into, I'll just have to close it on the other page and give it a moment. Just discard these changes. Do keep in mind that we need to check things in and check things out when we're editing and dealing with them. It's checked in. So why would you actually come to the Project Professional app application as opposed to using the browser window? For some of these higher functions, or more, more of a deep dive function, you'd go into your task usage view, or you'd actually go to your resource sheet view. So really massaging the data to that next level, as opposed to really having a very high level perspective on what you're doing. It also allows you to create specific views that you'd like to see within this particular window and add more data to this. For example, if I wanted to see predecessors in here, or actually the percentage work complete. So it does allow you to create specific views that you'd like to have when you're looking at your particular project, as opposed to having an admin create views that you'd like. Although that is also a commonplace where PMO and a whole team of PMs realize the value of having a specific view in addition to what gets shipped to them and created to them, and they actually request a view and it gets published as part of an enterprise view that is then available, other than these built-in views, as a custom view, and so on and forth. Something else to keep in mind is that you've got various tabs at the top. I won't cover all of these in details, but a few of these that I felt were important was setting the baseline. We typically set a baseline, and most of your reports would be powered off a single baseline, which would be that first baseline. So what happens when you actually have a need to move that baseline to another baseline, because you don't quite want to lose your original baseline? In a sense, how do you copy a baseline from, let's just say, I've set a baseline there in January and things have moved for me. I do need to re-baseline the project, but I don't want to re-baseline it using baseline 1, because deep down in reporting, the baseline that gets reported on is baseline 0. So what you can do is you can essentially say set interim plan, and you can actually copy the first baseline onto the second baseline. Therefore, you move what you originally had into one of those cached baselines, and you can actually save that as a snapshot of your project. And then you can go back and actually say, now that I've copied across my original baseline and I know what it looks like, I will actually reset my baseline or re-baseline my project. And what happens as a result of that is all your reporting still gets the critical data using the reference point of your new baseline. Although if you were to run an audit on the project, you could go back and look at your original baseline, if I can use a term. Next layer of it would be assignments. As I said, I'll touch very briefly on some of the resource/assignment type functionality. You can see there I've assigned myself to that particular task for the project called Develop Roadmap IP Approach B. And as a result of that, and as a result of assigning myself to that particular task and publishing that particular project, what happens is if I go to my typical project landing page and I go to my tasks, I'll actually see a whole host of things that were assigned to me, that are my tasks in a sense. And this is where the entire tasks/schedule picture links in. As a result of publishing those tasks assigned to myself, I have visibility of what's assigned to me, and rather than going into timesheeting, I can actually go in and provide individual task updates. For example, I don't quite have anything happening this week, but what I can do is I can go into this particular picture and I can say that I've actually done 4 hours of work in here. And I could actually select that, and I can say that as part of the defined project scope, because Renil or because Mark's given me a call and asked me to give him an update, because Mark is running through his end of the week or end of the month reporting cycle, I can actually send an individual update to Mark on that particular project, because that's all I've worked on. So that whole task update loop is completed. Mark requested Renil is assigned to that resource, to that particular activity, and now that he's actually completed 4 hours of work, he's actualized a part of what the plan was, and I've actually sent Mark an update on that particular task. The other option here is to be able to go in and use a timesheet functionality, and I'll just leave this without saving that, where you have a range of options within the timesheeting space. As a result of the same assignment that you saw on the other side, I actually have the same same row items or assignments sitting here. As you can see, I've got within the approach B, I've got a series of planned effort there as 8 days, on 8 hours per day for the rest of this week. And I can actually start plugging in saying I did do 8 hours there and I did do 4 hours there, and so on and forth. And I just want to save that particular progress at this point in time. I do not want to send an update to Mark. However, I can send in a progress update, which is an interim update for all the tasks, in the situation where you're actually doing end of month reporting or doing reporting in the middle of the week, and therefore you're not going to wait for the resource to finish your timesheeting at the end of the week. Whereas at the end of the week, after sending Mark an interim update, I will turn in my final timesheet, and then what that will do is convert all of those into, I'll probably have a whole series of other types of information in there in terms of actuals, and then what will happen is that'll go off and sit in under the hood with some commentary. Now, that goes off and sits with Mark for approval, and once Mark approves it, it actually pipes back into the project schedule as actuals. What you saw in here as the planned work is actually what is known as a forecast, and the timesheets that I've submitted would be actualized, and therefore give you that variance across the board on all the tasks and build it up all the way to the project layer of things. Alternatively, for those organizations or teams that are doing an agile project, who do not quite like or prefer this method of running a project or running tasks, you have the option of either using Planner, not using a schedule at all and using a planner, or having a very high level of saying we're in the initiation phases of things, or we're in month one, which there's no phases, there's just month one, we're planning, and that's where we are. And overall, we expect X to be an effort and Y to be the duration. And the innards of it all would be tracked through something similar to a planner here. As I mentioned before, you could run the whole project and initiative using Planner, or alternatively break it down. I did set this up direct before the session, and I plugged in a couple of tasks, and I thought that it would be a good segue from Ryan's session last week on just running through and showing you how you could add in a couple of new buckets into Planner and just move things around. Internally within the Sensei team, we do use Planner quite a bit to do ad hoc planning, to Planola Agile walk that we run with. So what I did was I added in the planning bucket previous, before I started off. I can easily go in and rename that to initiate if I wanted to. It's as easy as clicking into that and actually running through it. And add a bucket in there, saying close. Well, I realize the buckets don't necessarily match with what you do in Agile, but you could rename that to UAT, and you can name that to, as we call it, or as our solutions team likes to call it. And we can call that. I had these various ways in which you can populate this. You can go the whole 9 yards of saying, here's a task. So we could say complete webinar, and you could simply say add that in, and it actually sits as a raw item. However, and then what you could do is you could potentially pick that up in a more detailed session and say, well, does it actually sit in the to-do bucket, or is it sitting in the next one? Or hang on for a moment, this has started, this is assigned to Renil, and it is actually a very important task. And the due date of that is actually the 6th. And as you can see there, the moment I did that on the background there, it actually started flagging that it was overdue. You do not need to put in a start date, but you could easily put in a start date. Put in notes that are relevant to you. Excuse the typing. You can also add in under each one of the planner types various checklists that you have. So if you've got a developer who needs to go through and actually do various things during the day in order to get through his his particular sets of activities, then you can say that you're coding in the morning, you're doing internal tests, and you're doing a release, etc. And what happens is it actually sits under the planner task and allows you to, as a developer or as a person who's a Scrum Master, to go and say, well, Renil's actually said coding's done and internal tests are done, which means that when we have a Scrum meeting or stand up tomorrow, that should be ready for release, etc. And you can see there that's still overdue, and it flags for you the fact that it's an important item, and the next icon says it's in progress. And at the same time, what you can do is Renil can go in here and say, actually, that is due today, and I've actually completed that, and he'll leave it there. However, Renil doesn't realize that he just can't say it's completed here. Somebody who's finished UAT is going to say it's going to be completed. So we can, as a Scrum Master, Renil can go back in there and say it's in progress. You can change the buckets in here to active or to UAT. Or you can essentially move things around as necessary. I know I'm moving the other tile, and effectively in the stand-up meetings, Renil's going to be assigned something, and then that becomes active. And once it's finished, it goes into UAT, and then goes into planner, and then into the done bucket. And once that's complete, you tag it off, and it actually sits there in a whole host of things that are now done as part of the Scrum activity that you have been, running through the week, through the month. Very similar to how you'd do the task updates. In principle, it is similar to how you do task updates within your schedule. However, it is more click happy, as I call it at times, and it is very convenient if you only want to do planning on the go, or you want to do planning on the go. You prefer this, the whole Kanban board approach. There are a few other tips and tricks. That is the board view. You can also get a chart view of how you're faring with all the activities that you've planned. We've got 3 tasks that are left. There are so many that are complete or in progress, etc., and so on and forth. You also get an impression of what's a higher priority or a lesser priority. And then moving on, you also get a bit of a schedule type view in here. For those of you who are thinking of project for the web, we will have a follow-up session for Ben Cousins, one of our other consultants, who will take you through how this then morphs into something, into a project for the web. It will look similar, however, it will also have other perks and you know, certain features that are not available here. Okay, maybe I'll pause and say if there are any questions that you have, or if there's anything that I've covered that you'd like a bit more detail on.
Yes.
Sure.
A couple of. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can you expand a little on how MSP is a better tool to use for managing a project progress versus a simpler Excel? A common question we get from PMs. The challenge is project schedule is often perceived to be an overhead.
Okay. Relative to what we've seen with clients, and it is commonplace for clients to use Excel, and this ranges from anything to doing financial reporting using Excel to using Excel to actually run schedules. And it's common to believe that you could have a more simpler HUD, that it's more effective and simple. At the same time, it is important for you to note some of the value adds, and these are setting a baseline. You can't necessarily set a baseline within, you know, I'm sure if you put your heart and soul into it, you could write a macro and do some sort of baseline within an Excel sheet. However, setting baselines, some of the simpler calculations, consistency in what you call a schedule KPI. So as an organization, Sensei or organization X may say, if my project, if my task finish date slips by 10%, then it is now flagged as, you know, as amber. If it's by 20 days, it's going to be, you know, it's going to be red. Now, having that KPI being controlled from a central location where you can apply it to all your projects at the click of, you know, a button, that proves to be quite difficult if you've got individual Excel files. It'll be slightly easier if you have one Excel file with multiple sheets, but then you're getting into a whole lot of funky document management and document, you know, features. Certainly possible, but the value.
Just to add on that, Ronil.
Sure, Mike.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think it's super important to understand the purpose of why we update tasks, and that will actually ultimately determine what kind of task management tools we are taking and using. The difference between project and planner, for example, is actually the ability for you to assign not only multiple resources to a particular task, but manage their individual assignment of time. So I can say in a schedule, for example, I can say, hey, Ronil, I want you to work 4 hours on Monday and 6 hours on Tuesday and 8 hours on Thursday, whereby an easy task management tool like Excel or even Planner actually doesn't have the ability to determine the progress over time. So if that, and one of the reasons why you would want to do that is to determine the progress update of a task, of a complex project, and that's the reason why we use assignment or time phasing updating of tasks in comparison to just say, all right, I'm going to assign this task to you and you just tell me whether it's done or not. And I think depending on what kind of requirements you have, will therefore then also determine the complexity of how you would like to update that task information. I also see quite often another issue with tasks in Excel is that they are just not flexible enough when it comes to dependencies and all of the additional sets of information. So very much, you know, task management and updating task is dependent on what kind or what granular information you need on a task.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. There's been a couple of more, Ronil, that's come through. So there's one that was in relation to the timesheets that you went through earlier. And the question is, can timesheets be sent to resource managers as well as PMs?
Well,
Go on, Mark. It's all right.
Yeah, sorry. It's just it's a great question, really, because the purpose of a schedule and the purpose of a task quite often fulfills several different needs. On one hand, when I update my timesheet, I want to know that my timesheet manager is aware that I've worked 40 hours, but he doesn't really mind whether I worked on 1 or 5 projects. On the other hand, when I update my timesheet on project tasks, at the same time, I want to update those 5 different projects that I've been working on. So what this particular timesheet functionality actually does is it fulfills both of those needs. On one hand, you have the ability when you submit a project, a timesheet, that you get the approval from the timesheet manager saying that you've actually worked your 40 hours. And then a project manager gets a notification, and for every task update that you've updated in your timesheet, the project manager will actually get that as well. And once he accepts that actual value, it will automatically update the schedule in its own right. And that's pretty cool, I must say.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. And there's another one that's come in, which is there a relationship between the resource plan to the Gantt chart view? There's a follow-up question to that one. How does my allocation of resources under the resource plan view relate to the resources in the Gantt view?
So the task usage and the task usage and the resource usage views hang in together. The difference between the two is that they actually allow you to plan based on, it's the perspective. From the resource usage and resource plan views, you're looking at planning and driving this from the resources perspective. And I'll just swap over to that very quickly. The resource plan view is meant more so for you to do a high-level plan of how you're going to commit the resource and what your intentions are. They then power you to get visibility of, well, here's availability of the resource for these respective tasks, and now I can pick these resources and actually plug them in into the relevant tasks that I plan them for. And in adding to that, the resource plan is actually created, and it ties in with the first question we had. The resource plan is actually created using the enterprise resource pool, which is also something you wouldn't get if you are using an Excel type functionality. Having an enterprise resource pool to be able to plan your resources from one centralized point allows you to get the perspective on where your capacity and demand for resources as an organization sit. And therefore, that feeds back into resource plan. If renewal is overcommitted and you're planning renewal in against a task, then it starts flagging the fact that, well, there's, as you can see here, there's various people who are actually over allocated. And if I hover over them in the resource plan view, then you get an idea of, well, that's the case. And if you then go in and go into resource usage view, just up over, actually see why they're over allocated. So plan's more plan, usage is more how you're actually taking the plan and converting it, and that's how they all relate back to the enterprise resource pool. And I see there's a few other questions.
Yep. Thanks for that, Ronil. Another one that's on the list is, can I link my project managing planner to a project listed in Project Center?
I will let Mark answer that because he will be able to articulate it better than I would.
Can you just repeat that, please?
Yes, I can. Can I link my project managed in planner to a project listed in Project Center?
No, you can't. That's the short answer. Currently, the out-of-the-box capability that Project Online and Planner incorporates is a link of a task to a plan. But that's really all you can do at this point in time. Now, I know that this can be quite frustrating, especially because tasks are stored in a whole bunch of different places. But unfortunately, that's the way that this works right now. Now, will they ever incorporate a planner view into Project Online? I doubt it. I think they're actually going to extend that capability of task management into teams, and that's what Microsoft has announced in regards to Planner and to do an ultimately project for the web. And I think that will ultimately be that glue between them. But currently there is at least no way of doing that without customization. It is possible though, technically.
Perfect, thank you, Mark. And then there's the last one that's come up in the chat channel for now. Is there a tool that sits between MS Project and Planner in terms of functionalities?
Yes, that's a great question. It's called Project for the Web. It's that new project management tool. Ronil, do you want to showcase that quickly?
Yeah, I was holding out on showcasing that with Ben.
Oh, sorry.
So what I'll do.
So yes, that the idea really. So Microsoft said, okay, we've got this very, very mature, complex scheduling tool, which looks a little bit like Excel, and people often think, oh, look, it can't be that hard. It's like Excel. So MS Project as that. I'm going to call it as the professional project management scheduling tool. Well, then on the other hand, we have Planner, and Planner is really for I call it the information worker that needs to plan for a team, and that intuitivity is actually very beautiful with the boards and the details of the planner. That's great. Now, based on feedback that Microsoft received, and we fully and wholeheartedly agree with that, there needs to be an in-between between simplification and very complex. And Microsoft released Project for the Web for exactly that purpose. It hits the market between the information worker and the professional project manager. I like to refer to those people as the citizen project manager or accidental project manager. And what you can do in Project for the Web is you have all of the features more or less than Planner, with the ability to create dependencies between tasks and maintaining effort, so hours on that task as well. So that's that in-between line. I think it's also fair to say, and Microsoft communicated that the innovation of project and task management will from now on go into Project for the Web because of that purpose. Yeah, so that's that in-between tool between Planner and Project Online.
Perfect, thank you, Mark. And we'll also have a webinar coming up in short use, which we'll share with all of you, where we're actually dive a bit deeper into Project for the Web and show how that actually works. There has been another question come up for you, Ronil, which is Planner task allocated to a resource will appear on a resource's MS to-do list. Will a task on MS Project also appear in MS to-do lists?
No. Unfortunately not. For Project for the Web that will come, but not for Project Online anymore. And to be quite frank, the reason why that is, it's actually a very technical reason. Project Online as a very mature tool resulted from an on-prem background, Project Server, which ultimately became Project Online. And really what Microsoft has been doing over the last 2 years is modernizing the underlying technology. And this is where Project for the Web and Planner will ultimately hit into it. So I don't believe that Planner and or Project for the Web data will ever flow into Project Online. I do believe, however, that that will be the other way around. In Teams, you will have the ability to have a consolidated view of all of your tasks eventually. And this is the way that Microsoft is planning this right now. You will see that in the next couple of weeks. There will be a new addition to the, well, I call it the Microsoft Teams family, which is referred to as tasks. So watch that space. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. There was another question that just came in after that one, which is MS Project for the Web only allows resource allocation 100% on a task. Is there a way around this?
Not right now. You absolutely identified the shortcoming or the gap right now, and I would like to refer to, well, I'm using Microsoft Words, of course. I would like to refer to that as the minimal viable product. So at this point in time, you can assign more than one resource to a task, but they will equally distribute the effort amongst both of these tasks. So you cannot manage the assignment as you can in project right now, but that will happen eventually. The allocation of whether they are 100% allocated to that or not will have to ultimately come with the resource management capability that Microsoft is working on. And so the grapevine tells me that this will probably be released in the October timeframe. So yeah, watch that space. There's lots of new capabilities coming actually on a very regular basis with Project for the Web right now. They're often very small things, but that have a big impact. Right now, for example, there is the copy project capability that they just released. So yeah, I'm sure over the coming months you will see that capability eventually as in Project for the Web as well. That's my personal view.
Right, thanks, Mark. There's no other questions right now in the chat channel, so if there was anything else you wanted to go through, Ronil.
Sure. I might just mention that and give Greg a bit of a segue on the third session we'll have. There are a couple of questions on different types of projects and calendars. So you can certainly have different calendars within the technology. The calendars can be related to a group of employees. If you've got somebody who's working in a specific state who's only available X number of days, as we normally have across the board in Australia, you can have different calendars that cater for the availability. And what that'll do is it'll enable you to make sure that when there's a public holiday in New South Wales, that renewal's not reflected in the plan. And therefore your resource plan, piping all the way from all the various teams starts, giving a more realistic picture of availability and therefore driving demand. Something else I wanted to quickly touch upon was timesheets and just the way you can report time on timesheets. You could either plug in X number of hours against X number of hours planned. You can, or alternatively, you can do percentage task complete, or you could also say that you could also just use the timesheets to do a combination of those, and they all get driven from a whole range of time and task sheet type management functionality that sits under the hood. Was one other thing that I wanted to cover, and those would be the different types of projects and the structure projects, the project plan structure that you get as a result of having different types of projects. I'll click on this. I won't get too technical, but just bring up the various types you have there. In this particular instance, you can see that we've got a business as usual, a very small work package. So the type of project plan template that gets cookie cut with this would be very small, perhaps only one phase because it's a very simple bit of work. A minor project may have less phases of your project lifecycle than a major project. And what this allows you to do is to create very quickly cookie cut convert your ideas into actual projects with a meaningful representation of what that should look like. This is an idea that becomes a major project, and therefore it's got a whole 9 yards of phases and stages with milestones, etc., tagged into it. And having said that, I'll jump onto the last slide I had in here. Should be the best practices. Just taking taking the lead from what I've just mentioned on structure and governance and lifecycle. In creating your projects and setting project templates, it is quite it is of good value for you to align that with your life cycle, because that also then enables you to align with your reporting to the PMO and reflecting where you sit with the governance gates, building that picture of the pipeline all the way up. Also making sure that you're reflecting your scope and milestones accurately, things like procurement milestones, and when you're actualizing costs from third parties, because it actually helps you plan your forecasts and then plug in the actuals against something that's more realistic. And that's the next point. Not just reflecting the scope and milestones and having a structure, but having a plan that is more realistic and with adequate float in it and buffers in it. And it goes back to resource plan. As you saw in the plan that I flicked on the screen, a whole host of the generic resources I had were over allocated. And it is good to know when you're in the planning stages of a project or the initiation stages before you commit to resources or commit to the timelines, that this is the constraints that you're facing. It allows you to do portfolio planning much better. The next two are more about project dependencies. I know we didn't dive into dependencies. There is functionality within the project professional application where it allows you to tag milestones as dependencies and actually tag them between projects. It is a complicated feature and functionality, and it does require you to have consistency in how you maintain that. So you do need to use caution, but even flagging to other PMs that you are dependent on them or regularly working with them in terms of updates is a good approach. Constraints and manual tasks will require you to review and think about things when your targets move, when you've got a CR that comes in and plugs in, and so use them sparingly. Also ensuring that you've got a well-communicated critical path, and goes hand in hand with project dependencies. If I have a project that is dependency sales project, then I should be talking to her regularly and just figuring out how her plan is doing. Specifically when you've got projects that dependencies in flight. So when half of her projects is complete, then my last third of the project can commence, because you're then committed to the flight and you need to figure out the best way forward. Finally, and once again ties in with what Greg Carroll's going to talk about in the next webinar we'll host, planning resources. When you cookie cutter a project and you've got a high level structure, planning resources at a high level, have a resource plan and look at what your constraints are and what's realistic. And then as you go, and only plan those things to the detail level that you're certain of. So if it's a 3-year project, essentially plan the last 2 years at a high level, plan the first 3 months in more detail, and then use a rolling wave approach to move with it. It gives you more leeway in terms of getting resources, resource constraints addressed. Regularly reviewing and updating the plan. When you're in flight and you've got a very complex schedule, sometimes you may feel like you don't want to review it on a weekly basis, but it is easy to review it on a weekly basis and tap onto some of the lessons learned from previous projects. Because if you're a month down the line and you do not remember what happened in week 1, which caused a bit of a knock-on event, it does become a bit more challenging to figure out what moves and what got bumped for what reasons. Your project progress update, specifically a commentary behind your the reason why your schedule's not sticking to plan, becomes a bit more challenging. And finally, the baselines, as I showed you, ensuring that you're rebaselining and doing it when you have CRs and communicating that is quite important, and having that traceability of what your baselines were over the last several months. If you've got a whole load of CRs coming your way, would certainly help you in understanding what's changed, and just make it, I suppose end-to-end, all of these things are quite common, and you'll be able to find quite a few of these in white papers if you go online. And at the end of the day, we find that these are some of the simpler things that we can work on with clients that make a significant difference in the value they see when it comes to schedule management, timelines, just the effectiveness of data piping all the way, up and down through an organization. I will wrap it up there, and I've got a couple of more minutes. Could field a few more questions if you're interested. Let's see.
There's no more questions that come through in the chat channel. So if you have anyone, now is your time. I just also want to let everyone know that the recording will be made available after. So we'll send that out to you. And we also have a few other sessions that's related to project and work management that we'll send out as well that have the similar structure to this, where we go through a topic and where you can ask questions, and any questions that have come through that needs a bit deeper, I guess, answers, we'll make sure we get back to you with them in short due. So thank you all for joining, and hope you have enjoyed the session.
Yeah. Thanks all for taking time out.
Thank you.
Great session. Thanks, Neil. Bye.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Cecilia.
Thank you.